Everybody. I was thinking maybe to change the order of the chapters, instead of Halacha 12 to read Halacha 13 first, but I decided to not do that. So yesterday we talked about how Rav Melamed talks about the positive idea of observing Shabbat and how beneficial it is for us and for our relationship with Hashem. But he also notes in Halacha 12 that the prophets warned the Jewish people that the temple will be destroyed because of their lack of observance of Shabbat. And the good news in Halacha 13 is that the redemption is actually dependent on us observing Shabbat, and that's why there's all kinds of programs that turn Friday night into Shabbos and the global Shabbat for everybody. I think it's Shabbat Lech Lecha and all kinds of other ideas. So the redemption is dependent on Shabbat because the destruction of the temple was caused at least partially by Shabbat. So first, in order to understand what the prophets really did, we need to go into the idea of the Rambam. This is in chapter 9 of Yesodei Torah, the foundations of the Torah, Halacha Aleph and Bet. So in Halacha Aleph, he continues, he says, it is also said, and it is an everlasting statute for all your generations, and states it is not in the heavens. This teaches that a prophet can no longer add a new precept to the Torah. Therefore, if a person will arise, whether Jewish or Gentile, and perform a sign or wonder, and a result or a proof say that God sent him to A, add a mitzvah, B, withdraw a mitzvah, or C, explain a mitzvah in a manner which differs from the tradition received from Moshe, so that's the oral Torah that we have passed on from generation to generation, or D, if he says that the mitzvot commanded to the Jews are not forever or no longer necessary, but rather were given for a limited time. What is the halacha for this prophet that is lying? He is a false prophet. He comes to deny the prophecy of Moses and should be executed by strangulation. It's one of the four kinds of death sentence of the Sanhedrin because he dared to make statements in God's name which God never made. And God, blessed be his name, commanded Moses that this commandment is for us and our children forever, and God is not man that he speaks falsely or changes his mind. So therefore, the question arises, in Ken Lama Nemar Torah. So if this is true, then why does it say in the Torah that I will appoint a prophet from among their brethren like you, and I will place my words in his mouth, and he will speak? What does all these other prophets after Moses come to do? He is not coming to establish a new faith, but rather to command the people to fulfill the precepts of the Torah and to warn against its transgression. Again, Maimonides emphasizes first the positive, keep the Shabbat and make justice and treat the poor properly and make sure that the widow and the orphan, like the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah and others, and the last prophet, by the final prophet Malachi, who proclaimed, "Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant, Zechru Torah Moshe Avdi." And so that is all that the prophet comes to do. And so when the prophet, unfortunately, most of them, it's in a way of tochacha, of rebuke and telling the Jewish people that they were wrong. So just in case we thought that that's the proper way, Hashem says, no, mostly they are there just to the chazek divrei Torah. That's the words of Maimonides, to emphasize and to strengthen the Torah's observance. But unfortunately, because a lot of people over the years have lacked that observance and stopped believing in God, they had to warn them about the consequences that will happen. So Rav Melamed says the following in Halacha 12. Before the destruction of the first temple, God sent the prophet Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, to tell the nation and the kingdom of Judah that their future was dependent on their Shabbat observance. Thus saith the Lord to me, go and stand in the people's gate, by which the kings of Judah, it doesn't necessarily mean kings, but rather officials and ministers, etc., because there's only one king at a time of Judah, enter and by which they go forth, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, Hear the word of the Lord, O King of Judah, and all of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem who are enter by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, guard yourselves against carrying burdens on the day of Shabbat. So this is talking about carrying from a private domain to a public domain. And even nowadays, the Talmud says that that was a melacha grua because it doesn't seem like you're creating anything by doing it. The reason it's prohibited is because while we were building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in the desert, they had to carry the gigantic boards and the curtains, etc., to build them, and so that was not allowed to be done on Shabbat. And Pir Chameami made a beautiful song about this. I think it's called Shim'u Dvar Hashem, against carrying burdens on the day of Shabbat and against bringing them through the gates of Jerusalem. Nor shall you carry out burdens from your houses on the day of Shabbat, nor do any work, which is like I'm giving you the least work possible, so therefore you can do what's called kal v'chomer. If carrying something from my house to the street is forbidden, then for sure lighting a fire or slaughtering or sowing or plowing or all of the other 38 categories are definitely forbidden. Rather, you should hallow the day of Shabbat as I commanded your fathers. But they would not listen or turn their ear. They stiffened their necks and would not pay heed to accept discipline. And so then he continues, if you obey me, declares the Lord, and do not bring in burdens through the gates of the city on the day of Shabbat, and you hallow the day of Shabbat and do no work on it, then through the gates of this city shall enter kings and nobles who sit upon the throne of David, riding on chariots and horses, they, their noblemen, the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall be inhabited for all time, and people shall come from the towns of Judah and from the environs of Jerusalem. We have these verses said at the weddings, calls the son the kol simcha, the sound of happiness, the sound of people bringing offerings from all the nations to honor us and to participate in our holiness and our observance. And so again, this is the good news. This is in chapter 17 of Jeremiah. And last, the sages similarly state Jerusalem was destroyed because they desecrated Shabbat within it, as it is written, they have closed their eyes to my Shabbat, I am profaned in their midst. That's in Yechezkel, and Yechezkel was already after this destruction. And later on it states, and I sought a man among them to repair the wall or to stand in the breach before me on behalf of this land, that I might not destroy it, but I found none. So Hashem is basically saying, I was looking for somebody to stop the destruction, like Avram tried to stop the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Obviously, Jeremiah was praying and pleading, but he was in jail and maybe he wasn't able to continue his message. He was put in jail by the king of Judah, the king of Jerusalem. And so, like I said at the beginning, the good news that we'll learn tomorrow is that redemption is dependent on our Shabbat observance. And so I think it's a very interesting connection and very strengthening. And we'll stop here.